It says a conversational informal tone. I said I was going to expand on this. Now, this tells us that an advisory text is informal. And I've already told you about how to create conversational tone. Instead of giving straight up commands, as in typical instruction, you expand on your command. Instead of starting with the imperative tense, you start with a conditional conjunction, a conditional sentence, which will help you expand on the instruction you're given. Okay? Now, to make this making it conversational, expanding on the tone, expanding on this command or instruction also helps create an informal tone. Now, in addition to this, there's so many other ways to make a text informal. We can the use of personal pronouns, using simple sentences, contractions, avoiding technical words where possible. These are all ways to make a text informal. We know all these. And when we go to this page of the textbook that expanded on this, it dealt with it. Okay? So, in addition to using personal pronouns, uh, in this context, directly addressing the reader from the second person point of view, using the personal pronoun you can also use colloquial terms like slangs. In an advisory text, you're permitted to use slangs. You're permitted to go that far in making your text informal. Instead of using terms like their mother, see, there here is replaced with direct address, a direct pronoun, you, in the second person, and then mother is changed to mom, which is more informal, okay? Another good example of the use of slang is when you look here, it says little sprog. This is a UK slang for the word child, as in child, children. So instead of saying child, which is formal standard English, they've replaced it with a slang, a little sprog, okay? So that is on using colloquial language. I told you colloquial means informal, and the use of slangs is colloquial, informal. Okay, another thing we can do is the use of contractions, like I already said, when you're contracting nouns or pronouns and verbs, or you're contracting the verb and not. These are ways to make contractions as well to make your text informal. You're also allowed to add humor. Now, this is a new addition. We haven't talked about this in all the other kinds of texts that have required us to use the informal language. So, if you can use sarcasm, this is where creativity will come in place. Find a way to bring in humor. Humor means something funny. Okay, find a way to bring in humor, to bring in sarcasm without distracting your reader from your cause. Okay, so while adding humor or adding sarcasm, you have to do it very carefully. Don't get carried away or cause distractions for your reader. Now, also use straightforward vocabulary. In this case, this is under the uh that's part where I say avoid using technical vocabulary where possible. So instead of using technical words, use more straightforward words, words that you wouldn't require a glossary at the bottom of your essay to explain the words you're talking about, or words that won't require your reader going in search of their meanings. See the example here. It says brothers and sisters. These are more generally used words. Any anyone who understands English basically will understand the meaning of these words once they see them. But this might not be very common. It might surprise you to know that a lot of people, or a handful of people, might not quite understand the meaning of this word, especially for people who have it as a secondary language, not as a mother, who are not native speakers. Okay, so try to use more straightforward words. Avoid using technical vocabulary, technical words. All right. Now it also says use shorter sentences. Now I want to point something out here. Generally in class, when I tell you about how to make your text informal, I tell you to use simple sentences, right? Now, in the context of advisory texts, you don't, it says shorter sentences, and shorter sentences do not mean simple sentences, because even when you say expand on your instruction, instead of saying go to the principal. You remember the illustration I was giving about dealing with the bully? Instead of saying go to the principal, which is a typical way of writing an instruction beginning with the imperative tense, you could expand on that. And how do you expand on that? By using beginning with a conditional sentence. Make it sound like you're suggesting your opinion instead of commanding them to do what you're asking them to do. So you introduce such a conditional sentence with a conditional conjunction if. So if you want to deal with the bully, comma, you could go to the principal. Now, once I begin my sentence with if, automatically it makes my sentence complex, and a complex sentence is not simple. So in this context, when we talk about making your advisory text informal, we're not refer and in terms of shortening the sentences, we don't mean simple sentences. We only mean you keep your complex sentences as simple as possible. The word is making the sentences simpler, not making the sentences simple. Please note that difference, okay? And when we say keeping the complex sentence simple, we mean one subordinate clause at a time. Subordinate means dependent. So one dependent clause at a time. All right. Don't use more than one dependent clause in any sentence. That is the way you make a complex sentence simpler. We know I'm not going to go deep into the grammar aspect of it. Times and times without time and time again, we've dealt with clauses, parts of a sentence structure, phrases and clauses. And under clauses, we know subordinate and insubordinate, which are the same thing as dependent and independent clauses. So we know those. In a complex sentence, we have at least one dependent and one independent. Okay, so stick to only one subordinate, one dependent. Don't put more than two dependents. Once you put more than one dependent clause, once you have two dependent clauses and above, you've made your sentence, you're making it more complex. Now you're having things like compound complex sentences. I don't want to go into that. I told you I won't go into grammar. So to keep my explanation as simple and brief as possible, to make your sentences shorter or to make your complex sentences simpler, stick to one dependent clause and one independent clause. Okay? Now, the next clip I'm going to give you is like an overview, the summing up of all I've explained here today. All right? And to give, to narrow down my explanation and to tell you what I expect to see in your section 2 of this lesson or your section 2 of this topic, the part where you're required to actually draft an essay. That is in that next clip is where I'm going to tell you the things I'll be looking out for in your essays.